Hello, Sagittarius. This reading already feels really interesting. The moment I started connecting with your energy, I got this strong feeling that your name has been coming up in conversations you know nothing about. It's almost like someone can't stop talking about you. Not because they're trying to move on, but because they're trying to understand what they're feeling. Okay? And honestly, the more they talk about you, the more confused they become about why they can't let this go. There is someone here who has been asking questions, seeking advice, and looking for answers outside of themselves. But what they're beginning to realize is that nobody seems to understand this connection the way they do. And here's the question. What happens when someone finally stops listening to everyone else and starts listening to their own heart? Because that's exactly what this energy feels like. Someone is starting to see things differently. Someone is beginning to recognize a truth they've been avoiding for a very long time. So trust your intuition, Sagittarius, because what is unfolding here feels bigger than a simple conversation. It feels like a realization, a turning point, and it may change the way this person sees you and this connection moving forward. And let's get into your reading. The first thing I'm noticing is that this person keeps bringing you up, and I mean constantly. Maybe they don't even realize how often they're doing it. One minute they're talking about something completely unrelated, and somehow the conversation circles back to you. A memory, a story, something you said, the way you reacted to a situation, the way you made them laugh. It's like your energy keeps finding its way into their thoughts. The Six of Cups is sitting here, and honestly, it feels like they are replaying moments that seemed small at the time, but mean so much more now. The strange thing is that they thought distance would help. They thought less communication would make these feelings fade. They thought focusing on other things would finally quiet their mind. But it hasn't happened. In fact, the opposite seems to be true. The more time passes, the more present you become. And that's what they're struggling to understand. Because this person keeps looking for a logical explanation. They keep asking people what they think. They keep telling pieces of your story to friends, family members, or people they trust. Almost like they're hoping somebody will say something that finally makes everything make sense. But nobody can. Because what they're feeling doesn't seem to fit inside a simple explanation. The Page of Swords keeps showing up around this person. And what I'm getting is curiosity, observation, questions. Lots and lots of questions. They've been watching, thinking, analyzing, trying to understand why your connection continues to stay in their mind. Why your name still creates an emotional reaction. Why they still care. And honestly, Sagittarius, I don't think they've found the answer yet. The more answers they seek, the more questions appear. The more they try to define this connection, the more mysterious it feels. And that's where the hermit energy starts appearing. Because lately this person has been spending more time alone with their thoughts. Not necessarily physically alone, but emotionally, internally. They're reflecting on things they once ignored. They're revisiting conversations, revisiting choices, revisiting moments where they may have dismissed something important. You know, sometimes people don't realize what they're feeling while they're living through it. They only understand it later. And that's what this feels like. A delayed realization. An awareness slowly rising to the surface. Oh my God, Sagittarius. This person keeps arriving at the same place no matter how far they wander from it. You, your energy, your presence, your impact on their life. Temperance is here as well, and there's something beautiful about that. Because despite all the confusion, despite all the overthinking, despite all the conversations they've been having with other people, there's a quiet part of them that is beginning to settle. A quiet part that no longer wants outside opinions. A quiet part that wants honesty. Truth, clarity. They're beginning to understand that maybe this connection isn't something they need other people to explain. Maybe it's something they need to experience. Something they need to feel. And that realization hasn't fully arrived yet. It's still unfolding. It's still forming. But I can feel it happening. Because every conversation they have about you seems to lead them closer to a truth they've been avoiding. And once they finally stop searching for answers everywhere else, they're going to have to face what their own heart has been trying to tell them all along. And that's where things start becoming very interesting. Because the truth is, Sagittarius, some of the loudest voices around this person were never actually helping them understand their heart. They were helping them avoid it, And that's what feels so heavy here. I'm seeing somebody looking back on old conversations and realizing just how much influence other people had over their choices. Not because they were weak. Not because they didn't care. But because somewhere along the way, they stopped trusting themselves. They started trusting outside opinions more than their own intuition. And, honestly, that's where a lot of this confusion began. The Seven of Swords keeps appearing around these memories. Not in a dramatic way. More like a realization that not everything they were told was completely honest. Not everything was as it appeared. There were half-truths, assumptions, narratives created by people who didn't actually understand what was happening between the two of you. And the difficult part is that this person believed some of it. They listened. They absorbed it. They allowed it to shape how they viewed the connection. For some of you, there may have been a specific person whose opinion carried a lot of weight. A friend, a family member, someone they trusted, someone who convinced them they needed to be cautious, someone who encouraged them to question what they were feeling instead of exploring it. And for a while, that advice seemed reasonable. It felt safe. It felt logical. But the further they followed it, the further they moved away from what their own heart was trying to tell them. And that's where this Three of Swords energy begins to surface. Because this person is starting to recognize the consequences of those choices. Not all pain comes from betrayal. Sometimes pain comes from realizing you betrayed yourself. Sometimes pain comes from realizing you walked away from something meaningful because you were afraid of what other people might think. Oh my God, Sagittarius. That realization hits differently, especially when they start connecting the dots. Especially when they begin seeing how much energy was spent trying to protect themselves from something that may have never been a threat in the first place. I'm hearing this person ask themselves questions they weren't willing to ask before. What if I got it wrong? What if I misunderstood them? What if I listened to everybody except the one voice that mattered? And those questions aren't leaving them alone. The devil energy feels very present here too. What fascinates me is that this person is beginning to see certain patterns that once felt completely normal. Patterns of fear. Patterns of avoidance. Patterns of allowing doubt to control their decisions. It's almost like they're waking up and noticing chains they didn't even realize they were carrying. For some of you, these chains were connected to old beliefs. For others, they may have been connected to unhealthy relationships, outside pressure, expectations, or even fear of vulnerability. Whatever it was, it created distance between what they truly felt and what they allowed themselves to pursue. And Sagittarius, the more clarity they gain, the harder it becomes to pretend they don't see it. Because judgment is entering the reading in a very powerful way. Not as punishment, not as regret alone, but as awareness. The kind of awareness that changes everything. The kind of awareness that arrives after you've spent a long time convincing yourself that you are fine. This person is beginning to see situations differently. They're reviewing conversations differently. They're looking at your actions differently. Even the things they once questioned are starting to make more sense. And honestly, that can be uncomfortable. Because every new realization forces them to confront another old belief that no longer feels true. I'm getting this image of somebody sitting quietly after a conversation and suddenly thinking, wait a second. And once that thought appears, everything starts shifting. Because they can't unsee what they've seen. They can't unknow what they've learned. The story they've been telling themselves is starting to crack. The narrative created by fear is beginning to lose its power. And underneath all of that noise, underneath all of those opinions, underneath all of those doubts, there seems to be a truth waiting for them. A truth they've been approaching slowly, carefully, almost nervously. Because if they fully accept what they're beginning to realize, they're going to have to acknowledge something they have been avoiding for a very long time. And that realization feels much closer than they expected. Because the deeper this person looks, the harder it becomes to deny what has changed inside them. And honestly, Sagittarius, I don't think this change happened all at once. It feels gradual, quiet, almost invisible at first. Like somebody waking up one morning and realizing they no longer see the world the same way they used to. The star keeps appearing here, and every time I look at it, I get this feeling of renewed perspective. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because this person has started seeing possibilities where they once saw obstacles. They're beginning to recognize how much light entered their life through this connection. And what's interesting is that a lot of that realization seems connected to watching you. Watching how you've carried yourself. Watching how you've continued growing. Watching how you've remained authentic even when circumstances weren't easy. You never forced anything. You never demanded they become someone else. You simply showed up as yourself. And for this person, that may have been more powerful than they realized. The Queen of Wands energy feels incredibly strong around you here. Not because of what you've said, but because of what you've demonstrated. Confidence, self-respect, passion, a willingness to keep moving forward even when things didn't unfold the way you hoped. There's something about your energy that challenged this person without you even trying. You became proof that strength doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes strength is continuing to shine without needing validation from anyone else. And I feel like that stayed with them. Much longer than they expected. Much longer than they admitted. You know, Sagittarius, there are people who come into our lives and leave an impression. And then there are people who change the way we see ourselves. This connection feels much closer to the second one. Because this person is beginning to understand that you weren't simply offering affection. You were offering a different way of looking at life. A different way of looking at relationships. A different way of looking at love. And that realization feels very emotional. Because it forces them to confront something uncomfortable. The fact that they may have underestimated what you were actually bringing into their world. Judgment is showing itself again. And every time it appears, I get the sense of another layer being peeled back. Another moment of clarity. Another piece of the puzzle falling into place. They're starting to revisit old interactions from a completely different perspective. Things they once dismissed suddenly feel important. Conversations they barely thought about now replay in their mind. Little moments, little details, little gestures, all carrying new meaning. And honestly, that can be overwhelming. Because once somebody starts seeing things clearly, they also start seeing where they were blind. Oh my God, Sagittarius. I feel like there are moments when this person catches themselves smiling unexpectedly. Moments when they remember something about you and suddenly understand why it stayed with them. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was life-changing at the time, but because it was genuine. And genuine is becoming harder for them to ignore. Ace of Swords is entering this energy in a very beautiful way. It feels less like a shocking revelation and more like a quiet truth finally being acknowledged. The kind of truth that has been standing in the room the entire time, waiting patiently. This person is starting to understand that what drew them toward you wasn't temporary. It wasn't random. It wasn't based on convenience. There was substance here. There was depth here. There was something real here. And for someone who spent a long time questioning everything, that's a significant realization. Because clarity changes behavior. Clarity changes priorities. Clarity changes what people are willing to fight for and what they're willing to release. I'm getting this image of somebody standing at a crossroads. Not because they don't know which direction exists, but because they're finally admitting which direction they actually want. And that admission feels important. Maybe more important than they realize. Because once the heart recognizes something valuable, it becomes difficult to return to pretending it doesn't matter. The connection itself feels different in their eyes now. More meaningful, more significant, more alive. They're no longer looking at it through the lens of fear. They're beginning to look at it through the lens of possibility. And Sagittarius. That shift may be creating a question inside them that keeps growing louder every day. A question they haven't fully answered yet, but one that seems determined to be heard. What if it's finally time to say what has remained unspoken? Because once a truth reaches the heart, it rarely stays silent forever. And that's what feels different here, Sagittarius. This person doesn't seem focused on figuring things out anymore. They seem focused on finding the courage to say something, to finally put words around emotions they've been carrying for much longer than anyone realizes. The Knight of Cups immediately catches my attention. Not because of some grand gesture, not because of dramatic declarations, but because I keep feeling this nervous energy. The energy of somebody rehearsing conversations in their head. Somebody imagining how a moment might unfold before it actually happens. You know that feeling when you've been holding something inside for so long that speaking it out loud almost feels impossible? That's where they seem to be. They're carrying thoughts they never expressed, questions they never asked, feelings they never fully admitted. And honestly, Sagittarius, I think the weight of those unspoken things has become heavier than they expected. There are moments when this person feels ready. Moments when they convince themselves they're finally going to reach out. They're finally going to explain. They're finally going to tell you everything. And then doubt appears. Fear appears. Uncertainty appears. Because saying the truth is one thing. Facing the response is another. The Page of Cups feels very present in that space. Almost like the vulnerable part of them keeps trying to come forward. The softer side. The side they've protected. The side that doesn't always know how to ask for understanding. I keep hearing the words, "What if it's too late?" Not because they know it's too late, but because they fear it might be. Because while they've been sorting through their emotions, life hasn't stopped moving. You've continued growing. You've continued evolving. And there's a part of them wondering whether they still have a place in your world. Whether you would even want to hear what they have to say. Whether the door they left partially closed is still open. And that uncertainty creates hesitation. Okay, this feels important. Because I don't think they're only afraid of rejection. I think they're afraid of accountability. They're afraid of having to explain why certain things happened. Why certain choices were made. Why certain words were never spoken. There are pieces of this story they know you deserve to understand. And that's where Ace of Swords starts cutting through the fog. Every time I look at this card, I get the feeling of honesty demanding to be heard. Not perfect honesty. Not comfortable honesty. Real honesty. The kind that leaves somebody feeling exposed. The kind that requires courage. This person is beginning to realize that if they want genuine connection, they can't keep hiding behind silence. They can't keep avoiding difficult conversations. They can't keep expecting understanding without offering transparency. And, honestly, I think that realization is pushing them closer to action. Because there comes a point when avoiding the truth becomes more exhausting than speaking it. Oh my God, Sagittarius. I'm seeing someone sitting with a message half-written, deleting it, rewriting it, thinking about calling, changing their mind, practicing what they would say, imagining your reaction. This energy feels so human, not calculated, not manipulative, just nervous, deeply nervous, because what they want to say matters. And because you matter. Eight of Wands is beginning to move through the reading as well. There's a sense of momentum building beneath the surface. Not rushed, not chaotic, just movement. Like something that has been delayed for a long time is finally gathering enough energy to move forward. The silence doesn't feel as stable as it once did. The distance doesn't feel as comfortable as it once did. The things left unsaid seem to be asking for space, asking for air, asking to be released. And the interesting thing is that this person may not have all the answers yet. They may not know exactly how every conversation will unfold. They may not know exactly what comes afterward. But they're beginning to understand that staying silent isn't giving them peace. It's only keeping them suspended between what was and what could be. There's something incredibly emotional about that realization. Because when somebody reaches that point, they stop asking whether they should speak. They start asking how. And that's exactly where this energy seems to be resting. Somewhere between fear and courage. Somewhere between hesitation and honesty. Somewhere between the life they've been living and the conversation they've been avoiding. And Sagittarius. The closer they get to that conversation, the more one question seems to echo inside their heart. What if telling the truth changes everything? Because sometimes the biggest transformation isn't realizing how you feel. It's deciding you're finally going to honor it. And that's exactly where this energy seems to be leading. There is a noticeable shift happening inside this person. A shift away from fear. Away from expectations. Away from constantly measuring their choices against what everybody else thinks they should do. Honestly, Sagittarius, I keep hearing the words, I can't keep living my life for other people. Not in an angry way. Not in a rebellious way. Just in a deeply honest way. Like somebody waking up and realizing they've spent too much time trying to fit inside narratives that were never truly theirs. The Lovers appears here, and the feeling surrounding it is incredibly personal. Because this isn't just about choosing a relationship. It's about choosing authenticity, choosing what feels real, choosing what aligns with their heart rather than what earns approval from the outside world. And for someone who has struggled with outside influence, that's a powerful moment. Because suddenly the question changes. It's no longer, what will everyone think? It's becoming, what do I actually want? And the answer feels much clearer than it used to. You know, Sagittarius, there are certain people who make us feel like we have to become someone else to be loved. And then there are people who make us feel safe enough to be ourselves. This person is beginning to recognize which category you belong in. Every time your energy comes through this reading, there is this feeling of freedom. Not pressure, not control, not expectation. Freedom. The freedom to be imperfect. The freedom to be vulnerable. The freedom to grow. And honestly, that may be one of the reasons they've never been able to fully walk away from this connection. Because something about you allowed them to breathe. Something about you allowed them to imagine a different future. Temperance appears again, and I love the feeling around it. Because the energy feels calmer than it once did. Less conflicted. Less chaotic. It's almost like this person is no longer fighting themselves. No longer arguing with their own heart. No longer trying to convince themselves that what they feel isn't real. There's a sense of acceptance growing here. A willingness to stop running. A willingness to stop complicating something that may have been much simpler all along. And that acceptance is changing them. The Wheel of Fortune starts turning through this reading in such a beautiful way. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because this person is beginning to understand that life changes when we make different choices. Life changes when we stop repeating the same patterns. Life changes when we finally act from truth instead of fear. I keep feeling this awareness settling into them. A realization that some opportunities aren't meant to be endlessly postponed. Some conversations aren't meant to remain unfinished forever. Some connections continue appearing in our lives because they still have something important to teach us. Oh my God, Sagittarius. This person feels like they're standing at the edge of a new chapter. And for the first time in a long time, they aren't looking backward. They're looking forward. King of Wands carries a very different energy than what we've seen before. There's more confidence here. More certainty. Not certainty about every outcome, but certainty about what matters. Certainty about what deserves their effort. Certainty about what deserves their attention. And that's important. Because courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is deciding something is worth facing fear for. That's exactly what this feels like. This person is beginning to understand that avoiding vulnerability hasn't protected them. It has only delayed them. Delayed happiness. Delayed healing. Delayed possibilities they secretly wanted to explore. Strength closes this reading in such a powerful way. Because the strength I'm seeing isn't force. It's honesty. It's humility. It's accountability. It's the willingness to look at past mistakes and say, I want to do better. Not because somebody demanded it. Not because somebody pressured them. But because their heart genuinely wants to. There is something beautiful about that energy. Something mature. Something real. Because growth becomes meaningful when it comes from within. And I honestly feel like that's where this person is arriving. A place where they no longer want to be guided by fear. A place where they no longer want other people deciding what happiness should look like. A place where they are finally learning to trust themselves. And somewhere inside that journey, somewhere inside that growing courage, there seems to be a quiet hope. A hope that what was misunderstood can be understood. A hope that what was left unfinished can still be revisited. A hope that the story between you and them may not be ending after all, but preparing to begin a very different chapter. And Sagittarius, one last thing before we go. If there's one message coming through stronger than anything else, it's this. Not every connection enters our lives to be forgotten. Some connections stay with us because they change us. They help us see ourselves differently. They help us grow. And sometimes they return to our thoughts again and again until we're finally ready to understand why. So trust your path. Trust your heart. And trust whatever feels true for you. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I genuinely appreciate your time, your energy, and your presence. Sagittarius, you all mean a lot to me, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Take care. Okay.
Bye-bye.